9 months. Exactly 9 months ago I started playing Lords of the Fallen, and 5 months after that I got every single achievement in Lords of the Fallen, which took me over 110 hours. I was furious by the end because 100%ing this game required me to get every single item in it, but at least it was over. That's what I thought before I saw the Master of Fate update that added New Game Plus modifiers to the game, but most importantly, new achievements I had to get. And worst of all is that some of them required me to beat the game without dying once. This is how I truly 100%ed Lords of the Fallen. First things first, I barely remembered anything about the game. As soon as I got all achievements, I completely stopped caring about what was released and the in-game mechanics. So that's why I barely remembered how to play the game and how to properly dodge bosses. The new update expanded the New Game Plus system. Now there's a variety of different modifiers that will make your game harder or sometimes easier. Now, because I forgot everything about this game, I've started a New Game Plus 1 instead of New Game Plus 0. And this was a huge mistake, because New Game Plus 1 in Lords of the Fallen is the same as New Game Plus 7 in Elden Ring. I just made my life significantly worse, as bosses not only have a ton of health, but also can easily one-shot me. Yeah, I wonder how this will turn out in my no-hit run. But before that, let's start with the easier achievements. Overall, there are 8 different achievements for beating the game with different types of modifiers. Now you can do the pro gamer move and get all of them in one run by enabling every single modifier, but I found out about this only after I've completed all the achievements with separate runs. Yeah, as you already guessed, the first 2 modifiers make all enemies and items random. But it wasn't as chaotic as I'd expected it to be, because only certain enemy types rolled into others. For example, ranged enemies were randomized into other ranged enemies. During this run, I was just getting used to the new enemy's health and damage and trying to remember how to actually dodge bosses. Later, once we get to the permadeath modifiers, I will make a complete guide on all bosses and how to beat them. The next 2 modifiers were random enemies and withered health. The withered health modifier makes it so every amount of healing you receive is withered. This means you have to be extra careful during boss fights, because if you heal and then take damage right afterwards, there is a very high chance you will instantly die. As I previously said, we will discuss this modifier in greater detail during the Ironman runs. The third run had the modifiers of pre-upgraded and random loot. Random loot is self-explanatory, but pre-upgraded items makes it so they are immediately fully upgraded. At this point, I already knew how to dodge the majority of bosses and beat them without dying. The next achievement is special because it requires us to have random enemies and loot, increased enemy density, and have extreme vestige decay. While the other game modifiers are self-explanatory, extreme vestige decay makes it so you have only one single vestige point available. Now, at first I thought this wasn't that big of a problem because you can just put vestige seeds in place of the broken vestiges. But the problem is, once you plant one seed, the other one gets deleted. This means that if you need to backtrack somewhere, you will have to run through every single location, which I learned the hard way. You see, normally you have to backtrack only to the Belled Rise and the Thief of Chill Curse, which isn't that bad considering their proximity to the main hub. But if you decide to go for the Inferno ending, you will have to go back to every single beacon. And believe me, that wasn't fun at all. At this point you should have already received 6 achievements, considering that you did separate runs for each of them like I did. This means now we are tackling the achievements that require you to enable the Ironman modifier, also known as the permadeath game mode. So let's actually discuss how to beat the game without dying once, but before that we have some preparation to do. Because at this point you have already done 6 separate runs, you have obviously defeated every boss numerous times and thus already know their attack patterns. Not only that, but you have also received a lot of souls from killing them, and overall you have collected tons of different items if you are doing the achievements from my previous video. Now what I want you to do is to sell every single item you have, because let's be honest, all those trash armors and weapons will be useless after you 100% the game. And so after selling every single item in my inventory, I gained only a few levels because I was already above level 300. The soft cap for every status effect turns out to be 80, so I don't recommend upgrading them further than that. Now that I started talking about the stat upgrades, let's actually talk about your equipment. There are many different builds you can make in Lords of the Fallen, but I decided to go with the classic big sword with even bigger damage. And of course I'm talking about the Ravager Gregory's sword that deals over 1000 damage, and the Sword of the Unbroken Promise, which have a similar amount of damage. But what's even better is that the Sword of the Unbroken Promise also has the umbral effect build-up, meaning that when it procs, it will deal gigantic damage. Instead of using magic or crossbows, I decided to go with throwbows. Enhanced poison javelins have insane poison build-up, which allows you to deal huge damage, as it scales depending on the target's health. The corrupted banner javelin is also extremely useful, as it deals the highest amount of poise damage out of all weapons in the game. This means you can not only deal huge damage, but also quickly stun the enemy to make a deadly finisher. Usually I use it to fight mini-bosses, but it works great against bigger targets as well. In terms of armor, I simply use the ones with the biggest physical damage protection. Of course, you can try and adapt your protection to the bosses you're about to fight. For example, if a boss uses a lot of fire damage, you equip the armor with the best fire protection. But I think that's unnecessary because at the end of the day, every enemy uses physical damage, and many consumables decrease the non-physical damage you take. The trinkets I use are the Faceless Carving because while increasing my weather damage, it also increases defense against the 2 most common damage types. In terms of rings, you can choose anything that suits your build. I highly recommend using Verena's ring that gives passive regen. The majority of the boss fights are rather long, and even though the health regen seems negligent at first, in a couple of minutes it can heal a lot of health. For the second item, I decided to equip Grayson's ring. Compared to all others, it deals the biggest amount of damage. One important thing to note is that you can combine the rings. For example, if you have 2 Verena's rings, they will regenerate your health twice as fast. If you remember, I used this method in my previous video to get more loot from enemies. The consumables I use are of course various protection wards, pouches for my throwbows, and most importantly, heavenly vials. You see, at this point, because you have upgraded your character so much, even maxed out sanguinarixes don't get you to full health. But heavenly vials are unique because they fully restore your health, mana, and remove all negative status effects. Of course, because of their extreme power, you can get only 5 vials during one New Game Plus loop, so use them sparingly, like your personal get out of jail free card. Alright, we have the best equipment, now let's talk about the bosses we will have to defeat. Overall, there's only 5 endgame bosses that will be posing a threat to us, so from hardest to easiest, these are the LIGHTREAPER, Judge Cleric, Reinhold, the King, and the Hollow Crow. Thankfully, we don't have to fight the Unbroken Promise as it's an optional boss. So let's start off with the hardest of the bunch, this being the LIGHTREAPER. Thankfully, it's also the very first boss you have to fight, so it's nice we can immediately get rid of him. Although it's much easier said than done. fight opens with 2 dragon sequences that consist of 1 breath attack and 1 stomp. The stomp is important as it can easily kill you if you're not at full health. Now the true fight begins. It's divided in 3 phases. At first the Light Reaper is in his dormant state. There's a couple of notable attacks. First is this launch. Despite being rather easy to dodge, it's absolutely terrifying as pretty much guarantees your death. Another scary sequence of attacks is this water flow from Timu. And it's not because of how many times the Light Reaper can hit you, but more because of the way he finishes his combo. Sometimes the final strike can be replaced with a spear-like thrust that deals more damage and knocks you down. But the main problem with this strike is that it has different timings compared to the Light Reaper's usual combo. Meaning you will almost always get hit, because there's no indication whether the boss will do this or that. So to dodge this successfully, I recommend waiting a bit and then dodging depending on the attack type. We talked about the problematic attacks, let's finally talk about something useful. The Light Reaper can make this double strike that opens a great punish window, allowing you to make a combo for big damage. Furthermore, there's an attack when the Light Reaper straight up turns into a Beyblade, which gives enough time to throw 3 poison javelins. At this point, the boss will be in his awakening state. And at this moment, you should start applying poison. This phase adds 1 new move, when the Light Reaper draws a pentagram on the ground. At first, I didn't understand what to do, but I've discovered that if you dodge 2 times, the iframes are so big you don't take any damage. We finally reached the final demonic phase. During his transition, the boss leaves a fire wave that deals tons of damage. Now the Light Reaper can do fire damage, and his arsenal was updated with numerous abilities. First of all, he can now summon his dragon for a fire breath attack. On its own, this ability is pretty lame, but because right after it, the Light Reaper launches towards the player and lands with an explosion, it's important to stay away from the lava that the dragon leaves. That's because this jump leaves a massive punish window. Another attack that allows you to get some damage in is when the Light Reaper plunges his blade into the ground. Simply dodge at the right moment and you can get a hit in. There were also some minor changes to already existing attacks. For example, you will have to dodge 2 fire blades instead of 1. This is important because if you're not at full health, this attack can very easily kill you, assuming the ignite effect applies. It is also important to note that the Light Reaper is weak to the wither effect, so wither salts are very much welcome. Once you defeat the boss, he will summon his dragon to send a shockwave before dying. Thankfully, because we're still in the tutorial section, a cutscene will play, saving us from the attack. You don't even have to dodge it. Also, if you really need to upgrade your character, you can defeat the Light Reaper, then die, which will reset the world and allow you to fight him again, although at this point your level should be pretty high. Congratulations, you have completed the tutorial boss! But if seriously, after this the majority of the game is pretty much a cakewalk, and that's why we'll be immediately going to the Belled Rise by using the key we brought from Stomund. The reason we're doing this is so we first complete the harder sections of the game and then we tackle the early game. Like this, if we happen to die, we wouldn't lose as much progress. Although I've calculated that one Ironman playthrough takes around 4.5 hours, which means that if you really want to, you can complete it in one sitting. Via the Belled Rise, we can get to the Tower of Penance. The most dangerous part about this location are not the various enemies and bosses, but its fall damage. Because you have to be in the umbral realm while making your way down the tower, if you slip off a ledge, your run is over. Now granted you make it till the end of the tower, you'll be able to fight the second boss of this playthrough, Tancred, Master of Castigations. In my ranking, this boss is the 3rd most difficult, and it's for a reason. In his first phase, the boss uses primarily holy damage, so much so that some of his attacks are purely based on smite. And because my armor isn't really good against holy damage, these types of attacks pose a genuine threat. In addition to this, the boss has some one-shot attacks. For example, this one where he plants you onto his scepter. Thankfully, his first phase also has some very nice punish windows. That's because whenever the boss does a slam with his shield, his head is located on the same level as your weapons, which means the game applies a damage multiplier, counting these attacks as headshots. Overall, despite the one-shot potential, the first phase is rather easy, as attacks that fully consist of holy damage are quite rare. Moving on to the second portion of the fight, the boss becomes Reinhold, which is a much simpler name. In his first phase, the boss has numerous punish windows. I especially like this attack, which you can see on the screenshot page for the game, as it not only allows you to execute a combo, but also break the boss's stance and make a critical hit. The problem with this attack is that it's very random. Sometimes I was getting runs when Reinhold straight up ignored this ability, meanwhile in other runs, he only did this attack, which allowed me to get rid of him in seconds. Another reason that makes this attack so good is that in his second phase, Reinhold leaves a lava on the floor whenever he jumps, except for this slam, which means if you get lucky, it's possible to completely breeze through the second phase. But what if you didn't pray to the RNG gods today? Well, because the boss litters the floor with lava, this reminds me of someone, you can't really punish his attacks. In fact, you can't even deal damage without trading damage. So it's time to whip out the poisonous javelins and corrupted banners. I figured out that around 2 procs of poison and then a couple of banners are enough to kill the boss even on New Game Plus 1. Now that we're done with the Penance Tower, the Abbey of the Hallow Sisters is open, and alongside it, the access to the second hardest boss in the game, Judge Cleric. The most annoying part about this boss fight is that Judge Cleric has 2 different phases. The first one is the holy form, and the second one is the corrupted version. And the problem here is that these are technically 2 different bosses because they have different movesets, use different damage types, and have different resistances. During her first phase, Judge Cleric uses primarily holy damage, just like Reinhold. In fact, some of her attacks consist of only holy damage, which means if you're like me and have rather low holy protection, these attacks can actually one-shot you, so you need to be extra careful. These attacks include this holy slam, laser beam, and those thorns sticking from the ground. Regular holy thorns that appear after the boss's attacks don't deal much damage, but the ones that spawn after the arrow are brutal. And you know what else is brutal? The hitboxes of some of the attacks. For example, if you try and damage the boss while she's doing her holy beam attack, you will take damage. Another sequence of attacks that can easily screw you up is this holy sword combo. It is clearly indicated by the boss spinning her sword, but at this point you have no idea what variation of this attack will be. Just like with the LIGHTREAPER, this combo can end in different ways. The first variation are 2 slashes and then 2 more slashes, which is the easiest. The second is 2 slashes and then a delayed stab. And the third one is 2 slashes and then a slam, which leaves holy thorns. And as you already guessed, all of them have completely different dodge timings. For me personally, the stab attack was the most annoying one, because of how delayed it is compared to all others. Usually after this, Judge Cleric will do another combo, which by the end of it has a very nice punish window. The main problem with this attack is that you have to be in a specific position for the boss to finish the combo. So instead of dodging forwards or backwards, strafe right and left. And then when the boss goes for the slam, you can get a lot of damage in, especially because you're at head level of the boss, and just like with Reinhold, this counts as headshot damage. As I previously mentioned, the second phase is completely different from the first. You might recognize some attacks like this stab, but it's now much less obvious and has a different dodge window. At first, other attacks also look the same, but in reality they're quite different, although one very important change is the fact that the boss is now much less mobile. I've actually noticed that if you play extremely aggressively, you can punish almost every single attack. Only in the second portion of the fight, the corrupted judge starts to teleport around the place. Another attack that mimics the previous phase of the boss is this flame wave that appears. Normally it's supposed to be harder than the original because then the dome of fire starts closing in on you, but because this attack doesn't cover the entirety of the arena, unlike its previous counterpart, you can just run in the corner of the arena and throw projectiles at the boss from there. Speaking of throw bows, now is the best time to use them, especially in the second part of the battle when the judge teleports around. Speaking of which, this teleporting is accompanied by this fire totem that summons fire explosions around you. You can try and destroy it, but I personally prefer to just run around until the effect wears off. There are also numerous explosion attacks, for example this one that releases jumping lava bombs. If you're close enough to the boss, this attack is actually punishable. As I previously mentioned, in the second sub-phase of the fight, Judge becomes much faster. Her arsenal is upgraded with this flying pierce attack that has a very confusing hitbox, and this exploding fire slam. At this point, poison should have procced multiple times, so the fight should be over soon. Now that you're done with the belt rise, it's time to tackle the early game. Because this section is extremely easy, I will not focus on the bosses you have to encounter here, although the Harsh Saint can still one-shot you for some reason. But after you unlock the Skywrist Bridge shortcut, Andreas gives you the key to access the Fief of Chill Curse. This location is rather easy, although the Hollow Crow can be quite annoying. The important part of this boss fight is to not die, because the drowned girl is located in the umbral realm, and thus, after just one hit, she will disappear, not allowing you to do a combo for more damage. The main idea during this boss fight is to make sure your health is not withered. Because you will be using the umbral lamp, some of your health will be withered, meaning that dying is much more likely. The main problem with the Hollow Crow is that there are lots of enemies attacking you at the same time, and after executing a critical hit on the girl, the only thing you can do is simply dodge for some time. And this makes this boss so boring because you just have to dodge extremely long attacks while not being able to fight back. Overall, this boss is really easy, and I just wanted to talk about her in some detail. Now that we have defeated all bosses, we can get into the castle and fight the Sundered Monarch. But before fighting him, make sure to reload the game. That's because after unlocking the pathway to the Sundered Monarch, for some reason all effects stop appearing. This means that some of the boss's attacks will be literally undodgeable because you can't see them. This boss has undergone a variety of different changes. At first he was considered one of the weakest bosses in the game, but now he poses a genuine threat. In his first phase, I'm not sure if you can call it a phase, the king is completely static, so you can get some free hits in. The best part about this is that if you get hit, you can just AFK to regenerate your health. But once you do get enough damage, the actual fight begins. One thing you need to remember during this boss fight is to not get hit. And I know this sounds like a joke, but even though I'm using the best armor against physical damage, the Sundered Monarch can still kill me in just 2 simple hits. And if that wasn't enough, the boss also has numerous attacks that instantly kill you. For example, this grab attack, or this lounge forward. Another very problematic attack is when the king drags the stone head on the ground. Normally the first sequence isn't that bad, but if you're too close to the boss, he will do another one which is extremely delayed. Because I guess if Elden Ring does it, then every single other game has to have delayed attacks. So whenever you see this attack, I recommend you running away from the boss as far as possible so he doesn't follow it up with his other combo. Despite his terrifying one-shot potential, pretty much every single attack is punishable. The best part is that you can do 2 hits instead of 1, sometimes you can even do a combo. And although you have the ability to deal much more damage, the boss fight will still be quite slow because the king has a lot of health. He is in fact the target with the biggest amount of health in the entire game. It's basically the fire giant but from Wish. But his insane health pool is actually a plus, because poison would deal tremendous amounts of damage to him. After all, it scales according to the target's health. During the second phase of the boss fight, the only scary attack is the actual transition, because it can easily kill you as it solely consists of fire damage. The only thing that changes compared to the first part of the boss is that now whenever the king slams his rock on the ground, it will summon knives. So to avoid taking damage, you need to be even closer to the boss. And that's it. We have defeated the last boss in Lords of the Fallen without dying once. Although we still have the boss fight with Adyr himself, and despite it being extremely easy, there is still one glitch that ruins your entire playthrough. You see, before the rune of Adyr is embedded into his followers, they just stand there not doing anything. And if by any chance you decide to kill one of his followers that doesn't have the rune, he will not deal damage to the boss. And because we're playing on New Game Plus and the boss has more health than usual, if you kill at least one of his followers, the entire fight will be lost. Because new enemies will not spawn and thus you couldn't deal any more damage. So make sure to not accidentally hit an enemy that wouldn't do any damage to the boss if he dies. I decided to use corrupted banners for this part, so I don't accidentally hit an enemy I'm not supposed to. And just like that, with the final enemy dying and Adyr saying his last words, we use the umbral lamp to consume him and beat Lords of the Fallen without dying once. So this means we're done, right? We got the achievement, we've completed the game with the Ironman modifier, that's it. Well, no, because in order to 100% Lords of the Fallen, you will have to beat the entire game without dying not once, not twice, but 3 times! This run I just completed, I was doing with the increased enemy density modifier, which means there's a bit more enemies. But the next modifiers that are added to the permadeath run include extreme vestige decay and withered health. As I already said in the beginning of the video, you can complete them all at once if you just enable the Ironman modifier and all others. But I didn't know that at the time, so I had to beat the game again without dying and without any vestiges. As I previously said, the missing vestiges aren't a real problem, because you can just plant temporary vestiges to refill your health and ammo. But the real problem begins when you have to fast travel somewhere, because there are no vestiges, you have to run to whenever you're going. And that's exactly why we will be going for the radiance ending, so we don't have to go back to every single beacon and empower them with the rune of Adyr. Now we just have to complete one more Ironman run with the withered health modifier. This is the closest we will get to a no-hit run, so it's very important to be extremely careful while fighting bosses. That's because the only real way of regenerating your health is damaging the boss after you heal. I've already explained how to beat all problematic bosses. The final tip I will give you is to use all consumables you have, all damage salts, protection items, and even heavenly vials, because after you beat the game, they will be completely useless. And that's it. After 50 hours, or a total of 171 hours, I have truly completed every single achievement in Lords of the Fallen. This means I can finally, after 9 months, stop playing this game and forget about it forever. Oh, come on!